Hi everyone, welcome. So I hope the slides have been going well. As I said earlier, I won't be going through all these slides slide by slide. The slides do a good job of defining some information. I will talk a bit about some of the domain types and which are data types that we can look at and how we can create tables too. What I wanted to do in this video here is just give you a general idea of how you can actually use your pgAdmin to create SQL statements and to actually operate them too. Sometimes online, if you're using a REPL, it doesn't translate over to what we see really in our code. So to get started with this process, in a previous video, we talked about creating a server. That's from the week 1 lecture, and it's also inside of your database information for your project. I already created a record called test. And again, your pgAdmin gives you a ton of tools and information, so it might be a little overwhelming on what to do here. But I'm going to go ahead and just show you one way to create mock data and how to operate on that data too. And again, if you looked at some of the slides, some of the information you're seeing might be familiar. But if not, don't worry. This video is more for a reference of what you might do in your next homeworks when you're doing the SQL as well. Okay. So I created a server. Again, the way you could create servers is from the save these, your main dashboard. You can add a new one. So after you do that from the previous video, I created one called test. And every time you create a server, it has a bunch of information in it. You have a database that you can operate on, which is where your data is stored. You have table spaces and group roles, which we'll look at later. To actually create data that we can look at, you're going to open up your databases and go into your schemas. We usually only start with one schema. You might have multiple schemas, private, intermediate as well, stuff like that. We're going to go into our public schema. Let me close this guy. So really, when you open up the schema, this will be public. Once you open up this schema, we're going to go down to our tables here. Okay. So when we're making tables, there's two ways that you do this. pgAdmin gives us a bunch of information on how to actually create tables and use it very manually. So you could do it manually, or you could also do it through a query. And to access a way to do it through a query, you're going to right click on this and then go to query tool. Okay. This is where we'll type our SQL statements. So if you ever wanted to figure out how to type SQL code, right click and then go into your query tool. I wanted to show you a few pieces of information here as well to help you out. There's two other REPLs that kind of automate this process. If you type in REPL SQL, you'll get an SQLite online compiler and interpreter. You need to sign up with a GitHub or a Google account, but you can create a title all you want. This is useful because you could share it with your group mates or other people in the class too. And what we'll get here is essentially SQL code. Let's see if this runs right away. So this gives us SQL code, and it also gives us AI area for it and a shell where you can do this. Okay. So this might also generate mock data for you using the AI, but this is something that's a bit easier to use. There's also one more thing I want to show you is Mockaroo. So usually for the assignments, or if you're trying to get figure out how information works, you could sign up for Mockaroo using Google or GitHub as well. And what this does essentially is generate mock data for us with a certain amount of rows. So I'm going to do 500 rows. You can format it any way that you'd like, that you prefer. We can export it as SQL, tab delimited, or CSV. For purposes of this video, I'm going to use CSV because that's kind of the most used throughout there. I would go ahead and just keep this as Unix as well. And I'm going to say include the header. So essentially all these names will be saved for us. I'm going to generate this data and I'll get a mock data file. And if I open up this guy, you see now that I have all this data in my Excel file of 500 rows. Okay. So what I'm going to do here really quick is to show you the process of actually this guy uploading this into our server so we can operate on it. So on my desktop, I have this CSV file, mock data. I'm going to go back into my pgAdmin. And now what I want to do is I'm going to create a table that holds that data for us. Okay. So I can go to create and table. Now, when you're doing this by yourself through the pgAdmin, it's a bit more manual, but I'll just type out mock data for my name. It could be anything that you'd like it to be. I could say my data as well. but that's going to be where your files are saved. And what we're going to get now, see here, is I'm going to open up the data that I downloaded. And I see that I have 4 columns with the names ID, first name, last name, and email. Excuse me. So what I actually have to do is go ahead and add in 4 columns. And then it was ID, first name, last name, and then email. And again, the name is going to have to be the same as what it's in here for importing later. The data types for all of these, each of the IDs is one number, so I might just put an integer in there. And then these are characters, so let's try to put in a character for first name. And I kind of want to show you a difference here of these all look pretty similar, but once you start importing data, you'll see the difference. I'm going to put in character varying for my other two, but I'm just going to leave it as character for my first one up here. And then we could see not null essentially means that nothing could be null inside of this or an issue would occur. Primary key is what we saw earlier where it references other tables. I'm just going to make my ID a primary key. I'm going to save this here for us. And now if I try to do a query tool on this one, I can now put a query directly onto my my table called my data. Okay. Excuse me. So you can see in here, from what we're going to learn later on as well, there's row level security policies, indexes. We can look at constraints on your table. So essentially a constraint might be if I delete one row, I have to delete other information. I can't just have the little piece missing. And I also have my columns here. So these are the 4 columns I made. What I can do now is right click on this, say import export data. I'm going to go to where I saved my data right here, mock data. My file is a CSV. Or again, you could change this into whatever you want, and it should be able to work whatever you're coding in. And my options here, I'm going to select header on because I had my 4 columns as my header, and then my delimiter was comma, and I figured that out from by saying a CSV, a comma separated value file. But based on the type of data you get, you might need to change what delimiter you have. Okay. So again, what we're actually doing here is all SQL code, but it's just automated with a GUI in front of us, okay? So I'm going to hit OK. My process started, my process got completed, and now what I'm going to do, again, I'm inside of my test SQL query here. I'm going to try to say select star, again, select all information from my data. And if I run this now, we could see here that I have all these pieces of information with these here. You might notice a little issue is that, and let's just double check, this one is Major and then Mariela Gordon. What's happening here is that I made this column be a character. So what that means is that it's only going to put your character first car there. And again, this might be useful for some scenarios, but we usually use character varying. If we want to say there's a string of varying lengths, we don't really know what the lengths are, but you'll most likely use that as character varying. Okay. So my issue here might need to be to change the column. So I can go back into my table. I can go to my properties. I could go to columns and then simply change it to character varying and save. Issue that we see now here though, if I run it one more time, I get the character varying, but we already imported the data earlier, right? Like it's a different column. So even though we changed the column, the data is still our previous version. So what I'm going to type here is delete from my data. And usually we say this if there's a where, which tells us what we want to delete. But if I run this query, I'm going to delete 500, which means rows, and that means I got rid of all my data. I'm going to go back into my import. Excuse me. I'm going to hit OK again. And now I could say select star from my data. Great. And now I'm getting this mock data inside of there. And again, this is something where we could do some interesting types of SQL queries as well. Maybe we could say something where, let's see it here. See if this guy runs. Oops. Cool. So what this is doing is this is an if statement kind of. It's saying select all the pieces of information from my data where ID is 5. And what I could say here is select first name. So if I just want his first name, or I can get last name. And then again, we can kind of do this in different ways. I could say less than or equal to 10. So let's say I just want the first 10 people. So let's say you made a program and you're like, the first 10 people that join get an email or something like that too, as like a congratulations or a thank you for your support. You could do these type of SQL queries. Okay. So again, if the queries themselves seem a lot right now, don't worry. This is just a video of showing you how to use pgAdmin and how to import the data. One more thing that I wanted to show you is we could actually create tables different ways here as well. So you saw me do a very manual process, but if I go into my tables inside of my public schema, I can hit query tool and I could say something like create table public because I'm in my schema right here. If I had a private schema, if this wasn't called public, I wouldn't say public up here. And then I can make something like this, create table public.mysql data. And what it's going to do is I'm going to create my columns here. Okay. So this is something that you might have seen in the slides as well from earlier, but I could say ID integer, first name, I think it's varchar, varying character for that one. And let's say email, I say var character, sorry about that. Leave the last one without the comma and then put a semicolon. I could go ahead and try to run this code. Let's see if this runs for us. We see create table, query successfully returned. And now, if I see this one here, it should pop up somewhere for me. I have test data, might be in here as well. Okay. So in general, what we see here is that we can, there's different ways for us to go ahead and create these pieces of information. Usually when you're starting, it might be helpful to go ahead and make it more manual using these pieces of information. Otherwise, you could do it and do it this way using SQL code too. And then you could do your import with your data as well. Okay. So again, this is just a very kind of mock-up of how to use these, but I know that pgAdmin can be a bit overwhelming with how much information you're given at once. But I hope this kind of helps you show like, okay, when I'm actually doing my SQL code, how do I get into it and make it work like this? So hopefully this helps out. If you need more piece of information or more kind of demos like this for this tool specifically, let me know. And again, some websites that are very helpful for this are stuff like the Makaru website and then the SQL REPL if you don't want to go through this whole process, but this is just information you're provided there. So if you're given a homework or a quiz assignment where it says use this data, you will know now how to upload it. Great. Thank you, everyone.